All right. Next up is looking at the civil rights movement. The reason why I want to talk about this separately than anything else is to make sure that we cover all the important moments in American history, something we really don't talk a lot about in civics, that tie into the Constitution and additions to the Constitution through acts passed by Congress. So, some important things about the civil rights movement. The first thing is Brown versus Board of Education. This is a monumental Supreme Court case that basically desegregated the American school system, allowing whites and blacks to attend the same school, because what it did is it overturned the separate but equal policy that was created under the decision in 1896 of Plessy versus Ferguson. We then, in 1955, see the Montgomery bus boycott. This is when Rosa Parks, refused to move from her seat. She was sitting in the correct area of the bus, a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She refused to move. She was arrested, and people were upset with this. The iconic figure of the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., organized this bus boycott. And by attacking Montgomery's pocketbook, because you had African Americans who refused to use public transportation, Montgomery then decided to say, hey, if you're an African American, please ride the bus, sit wherever you want to sit. This did not really stop segregation from our society, but it definitely opened the door for the civil rights movement to grow. What we also see with the civil rights movement, we see the sit-ins, such that happened in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the lunch counter at Woolworth, which was a department store. You had some students from North Carolina A&T who wanted to be publicly served in the lunch counter. During segregation, if you were African American, you didn't sit with whites in a restaurant. You would have to go and knock on a door at the back of the restaurant to be served. You were lucky if you had anywhere to sit behind the restaurant, maybe in an alleyway, or if it was in the countryside, sitting underneath a tree. You were not allowed to eat with whites. So these students from North Carolina A&T organized a sit-in. And during the course of several days and weeks, the sit-in was successful. Woolworth allowed for African Americans to eat at the lunch counter with whites. So once again, you're attacking the pocketbook of the department store or a city, such as with Montgomery. We also have the Freedom Riders. These were people who would use buses to go through the Deep South to try to get other people to join the movement, to get people to register to vote, because we had things such as literacy tests, which prohibited people from voting unless they could prove that they could read and write. You had poll taxes, which you had to actually pay to vote. These things are illegal. The 24th Amendment says they're illegal. Poll taxes are not allowed in this country, even though it was still existing. We had a constitutional amendment prohibiting them. It was still going on. Dr. King gave his very famous speech, I Have a Dream. He did so in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. We have eventually, through all these efforts, we have the circumstance of the Civil Rights Act of '64 being passed, which allowed the federal government to prosecute people who violated individual civil rights. We also have the Voting Rights Act of '65, which basically said you cannot have poll taxes, you cannot have literacy tests. People have a right to vote in this country. It is a right, it is a privilege. It's something that should not be taken away unless there's due reason, such as committing a felony or being convicted of a felony. You can lose your voting rights in the state for that reason. But you cannot take away someone's rights because of color of skin, because of nationality, because of sexual orientation, or religious beliefs. So the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act of '65, expands upon people's civil rights and civil liberties. We also have something that promoted not just for African Americans but for women, the affirmative action laws passed by Congress. This basically says that if there is past discrimination in the workplace and a female applies for a job, then she should be given consideration to receive that job. And some people argue that this is reverse discrimination, that if you're white and you're male, then it's not fair to you. But the Supreme Court in numerous decisions have said, no, there's no such thing as reverse discrimination. Affirmative action is something that's still in place today. It is a way to make up for past indiscretions. It's a way for the federal government to say, we didn't do enough during the era of segregation. Now we need to fix the problems that we allowed to exist in this country. So with the civil rights movement, obviously people such as Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Dr. King, Rosa Parks, those are very iconic figures of this movement. And the end result is to try to make up for past discrimination. So the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, and the fact that we have affirmative action laws in place, those are there to promote and protect the rights of those who have in the past been discriminated against, and to ensure that the federal government is there to protect them, and if necessary to take it to the federal court system to prosecute those who violate the rights of others. So with the civil rights movement, it's a little bit of history that the only time we really discuss it in civics. You'll go into a lot more detail with this when you take American History, probably 2, in your second semester of your junior year. So the next thing that's going to be coming up is Unit 7. Unit 7 is going to be talking about the law in general, looking at specifically criminal law and looking at civil law. After that, the not so fun part, Units 8, 9, and 10, which is personal finance, microeconomics, and macroeconomics. So I'll be working on that very soon and hopefully have all that ready for you come the week before exams so that you can use these videos to study with. And also I'm going to give you one additional video at the very end, which is some test-taking tips and some ways to decompress before you start taking your final exams. So until then, see you later. Unit 7 is coming up next.